Hello, this is Taylor Garcia, and today we are going to be talking about evaluating formal and informal culturally responsive and accessible assessments. Today, we have many things that we're going to discuss. The list looks very long and overwhelming, but a lot of these things are going to be combined. So, we're going to be talking about evaluation and assessment, different types of assessment, being culturally responsive, and what that means and why it's important. We're going to be talking about the well being of students and leadership and its impact and influence on student learning. To start, we're going to be discussing evaluation versus assessment, how they're different, how they're similar. So, evaluation means that you are going to say how much of the goal that you're trying to reach has been attained so far. Students or adults, whoever you're evaluating, is going to be creating some sort of product for you to look at. And you are going to be, as the evaluator, you're going to be observing and drawing conclusions based on a certain set of standards or making a comparison to other similar work. And then assessment is a level of performance of an individual. And that is more of a process rather than someone creating a product. And it's a very methodical way to review information and then make improvements on the information that you have. And I really love this quote from some of the research I did for this presentation. It just says assessment and evaluation both have their purposes, and when they are used correctly, they can both add a significant value to teaching and learning. And I think the biggest part of that quote is assessment and evaluation, whichever one you choose to use, it has to be used correctly for it to have some sort of meaning. Next, we're going to talk about formative and summative assessments. So, formative assessments are designed to assist the learner by providing feedback. So, this is something that happens throughout the educational process while it's happening. So, you can do formative assessments throughout the whole educational process. And it's a way for you to be giving feedback, identifying strengths and saying, wow, you're doing this really great, identifying any areas of weakness and saying, these are some things we can be improving on, so that when you get to the summative assessment, um, that is the type of assessment you would do at the end of the whole process of the student or whoever it is that you're assessing, they're done learning. It's going to help the educator determine if that person is ready to progress to the next step or the next lesson or the next chapter or whatever it might be before moving on. Now we're going to talk about culturally responsive assessment. So, what that means for educators is that you really need to take the time to get to know your students first before you choose what assessments you are going to do to allow them to demonstrate their knowledge to you. A great way that you could do this is by collaborating with your colleagues, talk with your students, talk with families of your students, and create assessments that are truly appropriate for your students to demonstrate the knowledge that they have. Maybe they are not great with writing, so some sort of oral presentation is going to be better for them. Or maybe English isn't their first language and they're more comfortable speaking their native language. Let them journal and do their writing in their native language because it would come more naturally to them. So, really learning the culture of your students, knowing their family, knowing their culture, their traditions, all of that before choosing what assessments you're going to use. It's really important because you want to allow students to integrate their life into their learning. Students learn best when they have experience that they can relate on from the real world and apply it with their knowledge. And this is really going to show families and your own students that you respect their cultures and their differences. A couple of ways that you can do this. I've given a couple examples, but make those relationships a priority, letting them know that you care more about them as a person, not just your student who you're responsible for teaching. Let them know that you care about them and you want to know more about them and their family and their culture, their traditions. Make your classroom or wherever you are, make that a safe place for students to share. That's the best way for you to get to know them, is let them share their stories if they're comfortable letting you know what they've experienced in their lifetime. And also, using that experience to drive their engagement. If you know you have students that have a very strong connection to sports or a certain type of literature, find a way to um, tie those things into your instruction to keep them engaged. Next, we're going to talk about well being. And the overall well being of a student includes their physical, emotional, psychological, and their sociocultural health. So, their wellness isn't just their physical health, it includes all of those things. And if we want students to have a positive sense of well being, we have to consider all of those things to make sure that their needs are being met before we worry about teaching the curriculum and the content. Next, we're going to talk about leadership and student learning. High quality leaders have to achieve great impact, and some of the ways that they can do that are by setting directions, developing people, and making the organization work. And what those mean for setting directions, you want to have a clear vision, a clear mission of what your goal is and what you're trying to achieve. As a leader, you have to share that with your staff, with your students, with your families, with district leaders. That is your responsibility. Whatever your goal is, you need to share that with all parties involved so that everyone is working towards the same goal. As far as developing people, figure out what it is that your staff and your students need and find trainings, find activities, find videos, find lessons, find anything that you can to make the learning for your staff, for your students to be meaningful and help them develop as people. You can't just throw a teacher into a classroom and say, here you go, teach. You need to figure out what are they good at? What are some things you can improve on and build upon those things to help develop them as an educator. And the same thing goes for your students. And then making the organization work, you need to make sure that all the steps that you are taking need to promote teaching and learning for your students' sake and for your teacher's sake. Make sure that everything that you are putting into place is working together so that you are achieving whatever that goal is that you've set. So some effective assessment practices, since we've been talking a little bit about assessment, is to allow students to apply their knowledge in real world application problems. It's not enough to just give them a multiple choice assessment anymore and say, here, pick the best one, because who knows if they really know what the answers are or if they're just picking one that they think sounds right and it happens to be right. It's going to take a lot more time and effort, but letting them apply their knowledge into a real world situation is also going to show them why they're learning the content that they're learning. Another very effective assessment practice is having meaningful class discussions. Some of the questions that students might ask might be difficult. Let them ask those questions. Let your students and yourself be submerged into meaningful discussion and conversation to draw some new learning out of that. And then another great way to implement an effective assessment practice would be using Common Core standards. I know through the research it said about 40 states, I believe, have adopted these, but these standards really allow for a hands-on approach in new learning, which is very effective and beneficial for students. And these are the references for my presentation and training today. I hope that you found something beneficial, and I hope that this was helpful for you, and it will continue to be helpful for you in the future. Thank you so much for partaking with me today.